Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Trump's tariffs were introduced to protect American industries and reduce trade imbalances, but the cost to everyday consumers is becoming more evident. While intended to boost national strength, these measures have led to rising prices on imported goods and limited choices on store shelves. Small businesses in particular are struggling with increased operating costs and supply chain disruptions. Though the policies aim to promote domestic production, critics argue they place an unfair burden on households rather than addressing broader economic challenges. The debate continues over whether the long-term benefits outweigh the immediate impact on America. And joining us to discuss this is Godfrey Bloom, an English author, economist and former politician. Bloom served as a member of the European Parliament for Yorkshire and the Humber from 2004 to 2014. Originally elected for the UK Independence Party, he represented UKIP until September 2013. He then continued as an independent MEP until the end of his term. Known for his outspoken views on economics, climate change and social issues, Bloom has remained a notable and contentious figure in British politics. Today, he explains how Trump's tariffs meant to protect US industries have led to higher consumer prices and challenges for small businesses, sparking debates over their true economic impact. Well, thank you for joining us, Godfrey Bloom. My first question to you. President Trump has threatened tariffs as high as 100% on countries buying Russian oil, and a Senate bill is proposing a staggering 500%. Is this a pressure tactic that's likely to work, or in your opinion, could it backfire on the US?
Well, the problem is, Josh, tariffs never work. They don't work for anybody, not Trump, not anybody, because if you think it through rationally and you dissect the problem, you realize that they can't work. So let's break it down into examples. Let's say the Americans want to protect the steel industry, which they do. So they put tariffs on steel over above a certain quota on imports of steel. Well, that might be all right for the American steel industry, but what does it do for one of the world's biggest agricultural machinery manufacturers, John Deere? It makes their steel more expensive, and they want to sell their agricultural machinery globally, and that makes it more difficult for them to do so. And of course, it also follows for refrigerators or cookers or anything which has steel or aluminium on which these tariffs are being imposed. So who wins? The only people who win are certain manufacturers who are friends of the government or friends of the political party in perhaps what in America would be in a swing state, whereas in Great Britain it would be a marginal constituency, or South Wales, or whatever it happens to be, where you want to win political favour. So it doesn't win because the only people who pay tariffs are the consumers, which is something Trump, I don't think, fully seems to understand. It is paid for by your citizen. So if you put 100% on, let's say, Indian textiles, for example, or 50% on Indian textiles, it's the consumer that picks up the tab, the American consumer or the British consumer. So it means he's less money in his pocket because he can't buy other products. So the whole concept of tariffs is actually flawed economically, but nobody in politics seems to understand that.
Yes, and Godfrey, let's shift our attention now to India, of course, a top buyer of Russian oil. Trump is warning of steep new tariffs potentially within 24 hours. How do you think India might respond, and what's at stake in these US-India relations?
Well, India is, I think, the 6th or 7th now, and certainly growing economic power on the globe, growing at somewhere in the region of 6% a year, and it could come to 7%. So it's a very dynamic economy, which has got to go the distance. You know, it's on the up, as it were, when Western Europe and North America is in decline. So there's an economic factor there, of course there is, but one would have to think about the Indian perspective on this, and of course the United States is a major importer of Indian goods. But at the end of the day, you have to ask the question, whose business is it where India buys their oil? It's nobody's business but the Indians. So consequently, they need to buy as effectively as they can gas and oil or fertilizer or whatever else it may be at world prices, not prices suggested by the Americans or indeed anybody else. So they have to buy where they can buy at prices which are effective for their economy. The whole thing is actually ridiculous, but then this whole concept of this Ukrainian war is ridiculous, and I bet the CIA wish they'd never started it. Nobody wins from war. It doesn't matter whether it's Ukraine, it doesn't matter whether it's a matter of the Middle East. History shows that war is a very bad thing. It costs a lot of blood, a lot of treasure, a lot of people die, and a lot of countries go bankrupt fighting them. So for goodness sake, what we want is diplomacy and peace, not bully boy tactics from the Trump administration.
Yes, Godfrey, let's shift from India to China, which has also dismissed US pressure on energy policy. If tariffs are tied to its Russian oil imports, what could that mean for the improving China-US relations?
Well, again, I come back to the same things. I mean, China is a major international power and a manufacturing base, which is possibly colossal, bigger than anybody else's. And of course, they produce goods at the right price and on the right terms, which is why they're so successful as a manufacturing economy. And of course, the United States, to their cost, sent all that away. The capitalist system that they had, which was actually not capitalist in point of fact, to be strictly accurate, Josh, it was mercantilistic. It was a mercantilistic system they had. So they thought, we can manufacture stuff cheaper in China, so we'll send our manufacturing capacity to China. And now they're reaping the consequences of that rather short-sighted game. And of course, China doesn't have to buy its oil from anybody except at world prices because they're a major consumer. And any products that they buy are major consumers. And of course, they're not a geopolitical military expansionist power. Something else that doesn't seem to be able to get home to the Washington administration. If you look at a map, for example, and look at military bases and military expansion, you'll see that the expansionists are North America and NATO, and they've been expanding greatly since the fall of the Soviet Union. So the problem we have is not expansionism, geopolitical, military, industrial expansionism from China. It's actually from the failing countries which are in the North American zone and the European zone. But nobody seems to be able to step back and actually work out the numbers. And economics is a game of numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Politicians lie, but numbers don't.
Godfrey, let's stay on the topic. Swiss-based firms also play a role in trading Russian oil. Could neutral countries like Switzerland face secondary sanctions or tariffs? And how might this react, and how might they react amid upcoming US trade talks in the face of 39% tariffs themselves?
Well, again, I get back to tariffs. Who pays the tariff? The tariff is paid by the American citizen on any Swiss imports they have. And of course, people tend to think of imports or exports of just being manufactured goods, but that isn't so. So Switzerland offers lots of other things in the financial sector, for example, which aren't necessarily manufactured goods. So you're not counting cuckoo clocks or watches. You're having to look at the whole economic dynamic between those two countries. And the days, I would suggest, I'm an old man now, I'm 75. I was born in 1949. The days of America, the United States, being able to dominate the world and bully everybody are over. It's a multipolar world these days now, and what they need to do is get back to diplomacy, get back to talking to people, and get back into making their own manufacturing more effective, more cost-effective, so they can compete like they used to do on a world level. This bully boy tactic stuff is over. It's finished. It's gone. You can't turn the clock back any more than you can turn the clock back 100 years onto the British Empire when we could get away with that kind of behavior. It's all gone. You have to look forward. You have to settle down. You have to have diplomacy, trade talks. And there's another thing, of course, Josh, which we need to bear in mind, do we not, when it comes to the United States? They will use trade negotiations as a stick to beat people politically. So if they think, and of course they've done this in the past on the African continent, you can't have this and you can't have that unless you come along with us politically or militarily. It just doesn't work anymore, which is why we've got the problems on the globe that we have at the moment. And of course, the real force coming down the line, the real force is BRICS. BRICS is now the new game in town. And that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better and better as they get their act together. Not perfect yet, and it won't be perfect for decades. But this is the new game in town, not the old mercantilists in Western Europe and North America. The game's over, and the sooner we all wake up to that in the West, the better.
Well, yes, let's build on the broader topics that you've just made. Do you think we are seeing a shift towards global protectionism with these tariff threats? And what could this mean for the post-World War II trade system? You've alluded to some parts there.
Well, I don't think systems like protectionism historically have ever really worked. We tried it in Britain. We were very successful when we were a free trading nation in the Victorian era, and then we went to things like empire preference and stuff like that, and it doesn't really work. And if you look at the numbers over the long time, you might get a result in the short term, but you don't get a result in the long term. The most effective way that the world can operate in everybody's interests, consumers, producers, and everybody, is free trade. And if you look at things like, let me say, Frederick Bastiat, these things are, generally speaking, it's when his view was always when trade crosses borders, armies don't. And I think that's not always true, but it's definitely true most of the time.
Yes, and as these tariffs are starting to take effect, what's the likely economic fallout? Could this reignite inflation just as global markets seem to be stabilising?
Well, you see, I would take issue with the fact that markets are stabilising, and certainly inflation is stabilising. What we have coming down the track, of course, is a very, very big collapse of the Western fiat currency system. All of your £10 note or your 100 rupee note or your euro is just a worthless piece of paper, and it's credit. It's a promise on behalf of the central bank or the central banks who are sponsoring that particular currency. It's inherently worthless. So you're never going to get rid of inflation. You can't get rid of inflation when you're trading goods for pieces of paper or even digital, which are printed. And that, I'm afraid, history shows. Paper currencies always have failed. This is a problem that we've got. So I think what we have is a currency crisis, and a currency crisis by definition, is an inflationary crisis. As of course you could see, as you'll remember from your history books, Josh, you'll remember from the Weimar Republic, or more recently, 1945, Austria, Hungary, and even more recently than that, Zimbabwe. You cannot print your way out of this problem. You have to have a stable currency, which gives you stable interest rates and long-term zero inflation or very small inflation. Just to explain to your viewers here, Josh, who might be unfamiliar with this concept, in 1817, after the Battle of Waterloo, the British went back onto the gold system. They went back onto the gold system, and that was when the sovereign was first minted, I think I'm right in saying. And a loaf of bread, which was the staple commodity, if you will, the stable commodity in 1817 was bread. It was the same price in 1913. So for just under 100 years, a loaf of bread was the same price. Now, if you take and base it in gold again, let's say the staple commodity since then is a barrel of oil, which I think most people watching this would probably agree with, a barrel of oil. If you look at the price of oil in gold, you'll find that the price of oil has not inflated at all. And it's astonishing just how close that they have been for over 100 years. But what you actually need to do, you need to stabilize your money and money is something which has to have intrinsic value. And of course, for 5,000 years, it's been gold. And of course, sometimes silver, and silver's fine too. Printed pieces of paper or electronic digital things on a screen are credit. They're not the same thing at all.
Yes, let's bring it back now to consumers. How soon do you think it will be until US consumers and potentially global consumers feel the impact of Trump's tariff action, especially in terms of rising prices?
Well, I'm not quite. Timing is always a very difficult thing. But let's take aluminium and let's take steel, which I think is a good basic commodity, which will be inflated by tariffs and has been inflated by tariffs. That means that the cost of your automobile, your refrigerator, your cooker, and anything else that is made of steel, even your kitchen sink, will eventually go up in value. It may not go up very much to start with. It can only go up over the long term. And of course, the thing is with inflation, it does tend to hurt the ordinary working man. The American would call them Joe Sixpack. Of course, here, Josh, as an Englishman, you would know they were called the man on the Clapham omnibus. Who gets hurt by inflation? Working people, ordinary working people, people on fixed income, people sometimes without the benefit of a trade union, perhaps you could argue that. It's always the little guy. The big guy, the aristocrat, the big banker, all those people don't get hurt nearly as much. So it's little people, and of course, eventually little people turn. They will come onto the streets, as they did, of course, in the French Revolution and so on and so forth. And you just got to look at your history book to find out if people have got empty bellies, they'll come onto the streets. And I think we could be closer to that than we imagine.
Yes, and finally, Godfrey, let's now look at businesses operating not just across India, China, but also beyond. How serious is the risk from the evolving tariff actions and sanctions landscape?
Well, again, I would go back to the problem I think that we have, and I speak again as an old man here, that we used to have a very strong diplomatic core in all the major powers, major economic and military powers in history. That seems to have disappeared, and that's really counterintuitive if you think about it. We were actually safer when the Soviet Union was lined up against NATO along the inner German border. Life was actually safer because we kept on talking to each other, and there was a hotline in between the President of the United States, whoever he may have been at the time, and Kennedy at the time of the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I was a young teenager at the time, and I remember quite well. As Winston Churchill said, jaw is better than war, isn't it? And I think we've got to get back to actually fostering diplomacy, talking to each other, because generally speaking, one might argue, maybe not of politicians or military men, but most of us want to live in peace and in prosperity. And that's true of India, it's true of the Great Britain, it's true of Western Europe, it's true of North America. I don't meet anybody on my global travels who wants a war, whether it be a military war or a trade war. Nobody wants it. It seems to me that only the people that we manage to elect through a flawed electoral system seem to want that.
Yes, well, thank you ever so much, Godfrey Bloom, for speaking to us on Focal Length. With that, it is a wrap on this latest episode. For more international news updates, make sure to stay tuned here on NewsX World.